I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Are you doing your own research on things? That term, and it actually kind of funnily gets thrown around in the group of academics and researchers that I tend to hang with. You know, we throw around this term of like, do your own research in air quotes. It's really become this this statement that we hear people say before they're willing to make a decision specifically around their health. We definitely have this lack of trust in healthcare. We have a lack of trust in the professionals that we've either hired or we don't feel like we've hired them, but maybe they work for public health and in theory they've been hired to help us. There's this lack of trust of the information that we receive. And so it's birthed this, concept of doing your own research. And I wanted to dive in on this today. And the reason that I wanted to talk about it, this actually came up as a bit of a personal thing, is I'm teaching a course over the next couple of weeks. And depending on when this episode gets aired, I may have already taught it, on diabetes and insulin resistance, and had to really spend a significant amount of time looking at the literature on nutrition because we've studied every dietary pattern against every dietary pattern. We've studied all kinds of food options, all kinds of behavior change in patients with diabetes. And so the depth and breadth of information on nutrition is quite wide. And I came across a study that I didn't understand. I didn't understand how they got the results they got. I couldn't find the whole. So essentially they were claiming that this particular pattern of nutrition was causing weight loss, but the people were eating the same number of calories. And that is just physically impossible. And so there had to have been something in the study that was either missing or not reported, but I couldn't find it. And it made me think about this idea of doing your own research. So to contextualize and just back up a little bit, my job is to read research on many levels. I teach a course at McMaster University. I actually teach two courses at McMaster University currently. One on evidence-based nutrition and one on evidence-based integrative medicine. So essentially, how do we read research in integrative medicine and then use that to contextualize the role of integrative medicine in the scope of conventional healthcare? That's my job. And in the past, I have taught other courses, including sort of entry-level research, critical thinking, and critical appraisal courses. I also own a company called The Confident Clinician that teaches other practitioners to become more evidence-based. We also have a database of resources for naturopathic doctors and integrative medical practitioners to learn about topics and where the evidence lies for integrative medicine, and that's what that diabetes course was for. So when I say I'm going to do my own research, it's my literal job to read research and understand the statistics, to find the gaps and the holes and the errors and the sponsorship and all the things that influence how we feel about a particular paper. My literal educational training and employment hinges on my ability to do that and my continued investment in those skills. I belong to other groups and other courses that continue to sharpen my skills so that I can always show up with sort of the most evidence-based work. And so when an accountant says that they want to do their own research on a diet that I've recommended, or a teacher wants to do their own research on a recommendation that I've made around a medication or around a supplement, for example. We're really talking about two very different things, and yet we're kind of using the same word to describe both of those processes. And so I wanted to talk about that today because I feel like it's really possible that if you are doing a lot of your own research with respect to your health, that you're actually being led astray. The research, in air quotes I say, that is available to the layperson, whether that's through books or social media, is really not written and conducted in your best interest. They're selling you something. And so I want to talk about this. I want to talk a little bit about the lack of trust we have in professionals, how we've made people feel because they own the internet or they have the internet that they are capable of doing the level of research that their physician is doing, and that they have the skills and perspective taking and experience to be able to sift through new data and make health decisions based on it. And I'm not saying that it's not possible, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't have an interest in what you do and with your health, right? Like, I think sometimes when we call out patients for doing this and say, like, you need to probably trust some of the people on your health team, that makes it sound like I'm not empathetic to the fact that you feel hopeless, or that you feel like nobody has actually listened to you for the last 20 years while you complain about your fatigue. Those are two separate issues, right? I want you to have better medical experience. I want you to have information that is accessible. I want you to understand your health. That's literally the whole vision, mission, value statement of the podcast, right? Like, it's bringing you information that makes it more accessible. However, there has got to be somebody out there that knows more about a topic than you. There's probably thousands, actually, of people who understand the latest study that was published on intermittent fasting better than you. And yet, we have this distrust in the very professionals that we've hired to support us. And then we make it our responsibility to understand the literature that there are people whose literal job is to do this, right? And if I think, about those couple of professions I mentioned, right? If, the fire truck pulled up and you said, actually, you know what? I'm gonna just put this fire out on my own. Yeah, I'd like to fight my own fire, actually. Or, you go to your accountant and it's time to do taxes and you're like, you know what? I actually am going to Google how to do this, and I think I can probably figure this out. And I actually don't trust what you're doing. I know you went to school for this. I don't trust that you know what you're doing. And so I'm just going to Google it until I figure it out, right? Like, there are very few other professionals that we've allowed ourselves to take over their job, right? Your lawyer, right? We always say, oh, get a lawyer to read that over for us. Why? Because we don't know what we're looking at. We don't understand it. We don't understand the implications of signing the document. And yet, you're trying to figure out whether or not your doctor was lying to you by looking online to see what the reviews are for the medication that they've suggested. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as the legal document. They went to school for it. They read all the fine print. They contextualized it based on your situation. They wrote you a figurative contract with a prescription, and you're going to take it home and Google it. I know I'm being cheeky, but I really want to call this out. So the mistakes that we're making when we do our own research, one is that we assume that research is relatively easy to do, right? If I told you that it was 1 million hours of practice to get good at it, first of all, I'm not sure you'd believe me, right? I think you might think that you could just go look and that you would find what you needed to find, which is not true. You're actually not finding what you need to find, and especially if you're using Google. And I talk about this with clinicians. There's a big difference between a medical database and Google. Google is literally using your IP address and the last few things that you've searched and the fact that they know that you need to replace those towels in your upstairs bathroom to show you information it thinks you want to look at. Not the most accurate. It's making a decision going, their sister subscribes to Gwyneth Paltrow and they live close enough together that I bet they're close. So we're going to show them Gwyneth Paltrow's discussion on breakfast, not the American Diabetes Association's thoughts on breakfast. So the information you're getting back is skewed, and we probably don't have the skills to understand and recognize that. Also, like every article, and even journal articles, like even medical journal articles are written with slant or spin. Like headlines are rarely accurate. And I'm pointing this out often for my Confident Clinician group where I will screenshot the abstract and highlight a line that says, this was amazing. We did an amazing job in this study. And then show them the full text article that actually is like, it wasn't that amazing. And yet, even in the medical literature, we're slanting and spinning the information we share in order to make studies sound better. So imagine what happens when we read a blog, or you read a book, or you read a newspaper article. If we're slanting and spinning the journal articles, you can bet that the headline, the slant, and the spin of everything else you read is actually moving you towards making a decision that they want you to make. Buy this book, sign up for this email list, buy this product. And so because when we're hopeless and we don't feel heard and then we Google something and then coincidentally it's the same thing that your sister talked about last week, and the slant of the article is written to pull you in and make you feel heard and validated, that's not doing your own research. That's being led down a path by someone who's trying to sell you something. So I want to give you some tips, and we're going to talk that through on tips on how to try and do your own research. Although my general consensus or how I feel about this is you have to trust someone at some point to help you make some medical decisions. You just have to. There is no way, unless you're going to quit your job and go back to school to figure out how to read research papers, there's going to be some leap of faith that you have to make at some point in time that what's been suggested to you is accurate. I want you to just have someone on your team that you trust. Anyways, so research is hard to read. I want to call that out. So even I struggled to read this one particular paper, and I needed someone to support me in reading it. And this was my 10,000th paper that I've ever read in my life. There's slant, there's spin, there's headlines, right? So things are rarely accurate when you read them first glance, and Google is showing you information it thinks you are looking for, not the information you're looking for. And then the last kind of piece here before we talk about some other stuff is really one article is a drop in the bucket based on our current knowledge and understanding. And we do see this often in nutrition where we'll see a study with 13 people in it get some novel or new results. And suddenly there's entire diets and apps and platforms built around this new concept. And it's we forget, when something new gets published, we forget that there's a million other articles that have been published. And the truth we seek in science is really us moving towards an idea of more truth, right? We never get to the absolute truth in science, but we're moving towards more truth. We're developing deeper and deeper and better understandings month over month in the medical literature. So one study, one paper, one author, one finding is a drop in the bucket compared to the vast amount of literature that we've already published. And we'll see this online where people are talking about, calories don't matter, or some of these literally going against the basic physiology of the human body. We're are you honestly willing to ignore 100 years of research based on this one thing? It's the carnivore diet or some of these new age diets that are going to ignore thousands and thousands and thousands of studies on the Mediterranean diet. And so when you read that one headline, you need to be able to contextualize it against what we already know. Because if you can't, then you're not going to be able to incorporate that new information accurately into your life. So how do you manage this? Because like I said at the beginning, doing your own research, don't put words in my mouth and say that you're not supposed to be interested in your health or that you're not supposed to be part of decision making. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying blindly follow your doctor. There is so much gray in between doing what you're told and making all the decisions yourself based on what you Google. There's a lot in between those two points. There's dialogue, there's questions, there's discussing things like values and culture and all the things that influence how we make decisions. So I'm not saying don't be interested in your health and blindly follow the practitioners in your lives. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that doing your own research sometimes causes harm. And I will have some of the most highly intellectual people that I work with do not ignore or not accept conventional care because the research that they've done on their own has led them down a path that has given them, this perspective that if they had the skills to be able to back up and contextualize what they've read in the whole pool of literature we have on the topic, they actually would probably make a different decision. And so I want you to be critical of your own critical thinking. But here are some things that you can kind of ask yourself when you're doing your own research to try and make it better. The first great question is that you need to ask yourself is the study or the people that are being studied are even like you in the first place. And it's common that we would read something, that sounds great and then realize that particular bit of research was only done in patients with diabetes or only done in patients that are really high risk of something or that have a particular genetic tendency or who have a different lifestyle than you have. And so when we're reading research, the generalizability of research is an area where we will start, right, as a researcher. That if you're reading a paper and it looks like a very small percentage of the population is going to benefit from the work that was in the paper, we can't make a global recommendation for it. There's great examples of this. So things like how if we give people who are institutionalized or the elderly who are institutionalized, if we give them like some basic nutrition, like a multivitamin or zinc or a protein shake, they actually get less influenza. And it's not because protein shakes cure influenza, it's because they have protein energy malnutrition in their institutionalized diet. And if we fix it, then they get sick less often. But sometimes when we read about that kind of information online, the spin is, do you get sick all the time? Protein, buy our protein shakes. But the study that they're pulling from wasn't like you, right? You probably don't have protein energy malnutrition like they do if you're institutionalized and elderly. And so and that's a really simple example, but there are other much more complex examples when we're looking at cardiovascular risk or insulin resistance or future risk of osteoporosis or fracture risk. And we're trying to educate and inform patients around the benefits and risks of taking medication. They can easily find a paper that suggests that a particular group doesn't benefit from medication and say, well, look, see this paper? They didn't get any better on their medication. But maybe they're not like you, right? Maybe you wouldn't have gotten into that study if you applied. And that's actually the great question, right? If you're reading research and you're trying to figure out what's what, you have to ask yourself, would I have got into this study if I applied? And that's in the inclusion or exclusion criteria where they define who they're studying. And so if you're not similar enough to those people to be allowed in the study, then maybe the results have nothing to do with you and maybe they're not even relevant to you. And that's why sometimes having a practitioner that understands how to contextualize research with respect to real patients is really important. And if you wouldn't have gotten into the study, you have to at least ask yourself if you're similar enough to those people that your results would be the same. So maybe you're not male, but do we think that maybe even if you were female, you probably would have got the same results? Because then maybe we can, borrow that literature for you. Maybe there isn't what we like a sexual dimorphism in how those results would have showed up, right? Some things present very differently in men and some don't. And maybe you can borrow the information from that study on men. So you have to be able to ask that question. Are you similar enough to these people that you would get the same results? Another question I would ask is, does this confirm or deny what standard care is? And how am I feeling about that? And I think this is kind of important to bring up. So sometimes it's quite attractive, and I actually did a great episode about a year ago with David Robert Grimes where we looked at cognitive distortions. And if you haven't listened to that episode, it's a fun one because we talk about why do we believe in conspiracies, right? Why do we love the title that says the secrets the doctor won't tell you? There is something about the human condition that we like to believe that people are out to get us. Can you imagine that the entire medical profession is trying to keep something from you that would keep you alive longer or give you a better life? But yet, right, we do believe parts of that. We believe that there is a secret that Big Pharma doesn't want us to know, or that our doctor just hasn't spent enough time on something to really know it, or that there is this general tendency to want to keep everybody sick, right? We kind of believe those little whispers of conspiracy when we start to do our own research. Yeah, I know he said the answer is this, but there's no way I'm just going to blindly follow what he said. Right? That the undercurrent of that is that he doesn't want what's best for you. That your doctor is trying to steer you wrong. That the entire associations and everything that healthcare is built on is trying to hold you back. Right? That is not a positive, hopeful way to live, actually. And so if you're feeling those things, I'm sorry, because that means you've probably been traumatized or wronged at some point in your healthcare. And I want you to know that you probably can heal from that and become more trusting and more connected with your healthcare experience if you feel like everyone is trying to get you to die earlier. I really want you to examine that. And so if you're attracted to ideas and articles that are very contrarian, or, the Canadian Diabetes Association says one thing, but there's no way you're going to believe them, you just really have to think about that and why that is. And why do you care about being oppositional to standard care? It's funny, sometimes I'll joke that I'm the naturopath where people go to have their medication sort of validated for them because people feel so guilty and so shameful for filling a prescription. And then they go to the naturopath and I say, yeah, that sounds really good that you're doing that. And they're like, oh, thank God, I was worried about telling you. That's a problem, right? That's a problem that my entire profession is seen as this, again, contrarian to wanting people to be well. But also for you as the person, if you're feeling that way about your medication or the suggestions that are being offered to you, I really want you to think about that. So if the things you're attracted to or the research you're attracted to is very fringe or is denying what standard care is, I really want you to kind of think about why that's attractive for you and where is the hurt, right? That's making you feel like the thousands of medical professionals on earth are not moving forward in your best interest. And then the last question, which I think is maybe the most important, is there someone on your team or someone that you could consult with that would help you understand your own research and help you identify your own bias and comfortably have that conversation about where your values are, what your culture is suggesting for you, and then also what you want, right? There's got to be someone on your health team, or you need someone on your health team that can help you contextualize what you read online and answer your questions so that you can feel good about the decision. It's funny, I saw this post on social media the other day about how to pick a good doctor. And I actually was quite against what they said. They said one of the things was, you should say to your doctor, can you give me some research so that I can read what you've suggested? And that was their suggestion. And like, this is how you pick a good doctor. That doctor should be able to give you some research so that you can read up on what they've suggested. That's not possible, actually. I mean, unless we really want to cut corners and be like, here's what the American Diabetes Association says, and that's what I said too. What you're asking for is for someone to take thousands of hours of work, thousands of hours of experience, thousands of thoughts that we've had in the shower, on a walk, when we're talking to our colleagues, when we're at a convention, that we've used to bring together complex medical decision making, and you kind of want us to give that to you because you don't trust that we're all working in your best interest? I don't know what the answer is, because I do want autonomous and thoughtful and self-authorized patients. I also think you need to respect some of the research process. And so if you want to do your own research, let's just be honest about what we're doing. And if you're validating some of your own bias, if you're getting down a rabbit hole that's taking you totally fringe and off the beaten path, let's question why that is. Let's question why we don't trust anyone on our health team. And maybe the better question to your doctor isn't, can you show me your research? Because they probably can't. Is, can you help me understand what went into making that decision for me? And that actually might help you feel more comfortable if they can articulate why they chose a medication for you, what their plan is for you, what the next steps are if it doesn't work out. That is a way more effective conversation than show me your research. Because research to your physician and to patients means very, very different things. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.